Hey, welcome back to another episode of Bounty and Soul's Plant-Powered Kitchen. My name is Lyric. I'm here today to talk about cabbages. We have had so many local cabbages going out in our market from our growers at Dr. John Wilson Community Garden, the Warren Wilson College Garden, Root Cause Farm, the Fairview Road Resilience Garden. We're really excited about it because cabbages are a really versatile vegetable. You can eat cabbages raw or cooked, or, as we'll see today, fermented, which is technically raw but with a little extra magic thrown in. So what is fermentation? Specifically related to food, fermentation is when microorganisms like bacteria and yeast are introduced to an environment like a jar of sauerkraut, and they are eating, digesting, and metabolizing components of the food like carbohydrates and transforming them into something else like acids. And that's why things like sauerkraut have such a tangy flavor. It's that acidity. And humans have been doing this for so long. It's estimated that humans have been fermenting foods of all kinds for like 9,000 years. And you might be thinking, this sounds a little weird. I'm not sure if it's for me, but you probably have eaten fermented foods or eat them regularly without even having known that they've been fermented along the way. Foods like coffee has to be fermented before it's in the edible bean form. Chocolate is fermented. Beer, pickles, tofu, tempeh, kombucha, tea, lots of foods. So I'm going to go ahead and start making my sauerkraut, and we can talk all along the way about all of the benefits of transforming cabbage into sauerkraut. What's going to happen as you're eating that food and as it's being assimilated in your body. All you need are two ingredients, cabbage and salt. That's it. You also need a jar, probably a couple jars if you have small jars like me. All my big jars are full, but you could use a bigger jar as well. And then you need a big mixing bowl and a cutting board and a knife. The first step is to chop your cabbage into either really thin strips or kind of bite-sized chunks. It depends on what type of texture you like for your sauerkraut. I tend to go for more of the strip texture. So you're going to cut off the base here of the cabbage. You don't need to include that in your sauerkraut. So you can just cut it off like that. And then the rest of this cabbage can absolutely be used. You know, the core tends to be a little bit thicker, so you could chop that really small, but I always incorporate it and use it so that it doesn't go to waste. So the best way, you know, I always say if you're going to chop something is to get to a nice flat surface like we have now and get that flat surface down on the cutting board so your food isn't rolling around on you. All my cabbage chopped in my bowl. Something I did not mention before I started chopping, an important consideration is that you want to be keeping all of the tools that you're using, your knife, your cutting board, your bowl, and your cabbage. You want to make sure all of those implements are really clean before you start. You just want to minimize any chances of introducing bacteria or mold or other substances that you don't want to be in your ferment. So that cabbage filled just about this whole bowl. One of the trickiest parts of making sauerkraut is knowing how much salt to use. I use a scale. Our friends at Fermenty Foods in Asheville, they do sauerkraut and all sorts of fermented foods. They do fermented spices and things. They're wonderful. They donate their ferments to Bounty and Soul so we can share them with the community, and they also donate their knowledge and wisdom. You can find recipes and instructions on their website. So I've actually been following one of their methods for some years, and so I weigh the cabbage that I have, and then I measure out 2% of that weight in salt. If you don't have a scale, it can be a little bit trickier. I've found over the years that tends to be that weight ratio. For a cabbage that was the size that I had, you know, just a regular kind of mid-sized cabbage, that usually comes out to about a quarter cup of salt. And you want to use salt that's finely ground. If you have really coarse salt like me, I just mash it up in my mortar and pestle first, and that's going to help it just dissolve faster. So you're just going to add all of your salt to your cabbage, and then you're going to go hands in. So you're gonna wanna mash the cabbage up. You can kind of use like this type of motion or a pounding motion, or you could use the back of your jar or something like similar to that, if that's uncomfortable for your hands. But you want to be mashing it up until you start to release the brine. The brine is going to be a liquid, so this can take a few minutes. But I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So here's what my cabbage looks like after I mashed it up. You can see it has softened, it is wet, and you can see down here in the bottom of the bowl there is the brine. So it's released a lot of liquid, and that's exactly what you're looking for, and you know you're ready to put it in your jar. I have all of my cabbage prepared to go into my jars, but what does that mean? What just happened? You know, now I just have wet, salty cabbage, right? What's gonna happen when I put it in this jar? So salt's a natural preservative. So in one essence, what you're doing by transforming your cabbage to sauerkraut is you're going to make this food able to be eaten for much longer. Sauerkraut can store in the fridge for weeks or months if it was properly fermented and stored. So then you can be calling on that food, eating that food all along the way, instead of a cabbage which would potentially spoil before that. You're also making it easier to digest. By introducing the microorganisms that eat a lot of the complex carbohydrates, it takes some of that weight off of your digestive system to break those compounds down. By eating the sauerkraut that has the microbial activity in it, you're introducing those really hard-working microorganisms into your body, into your digestive tract. The cabbage has prebiotics, which are like fibers and carbohydrates, and then the probiotics are the microorganisms, and those are going to come along and eat up all of the prebiotics, already digesting them for you and making them more available to your body. As you eat the sauerkraut, you're introducing those probiotics into your gut biome, as it's called, and those can live on to help to digest other foods that you're eating if they're not fermented. And your digestive system is so important to take care of because it's connected to so much more in your body than we typically think, than we're really taught a lot through our lives. Your gut is directly linked to your brain and your mental emotional well-being. Serotonin, which is known as the happiness chemical, is actually produced primarily in your gut, like 96% of it. And about 70% of the cells that comprise our immune system are housed in our gut. So by caring for your gut, you're caring for all of the other systems in your body. So there's studies that show that an increase in fermented foods can help to lower rates of depression, chronic fatigue, weakened immune system. Okay, I'm excited to get my kraut fermenting in my jar. So what I'm going to do is scoop out small quantities of the kraut, add it to the jar, and then I'm going to pound it in every couple inches, pound it down really, really tight. And so for this, I'm going to use the end of my reamer. This is a tool that you use to juice citrus, but I find it works really well for this. Another common tool that you probably have in your house, if you don't have something that has this blunt tip at the end, and you want it to be, you know, this is probably as thin as you want it fairly wide. Another common household tool you might have is a hammer, and so you could use the bottom end of this hammer. You just want to wash it really, really well, make sure it's really sanitary, and then you can pound like this. But I'm just going to use my reamer. So I'm going to scoop out the kraut, add it to my jar, start with about that much, and then I'm just going to pound it in. And so what this is doing is getting rid of any air bubbles, because you don't want to have a lot of oxygen or air in the jar, because that is what can cause things like mold, which is what you don't want in your food. So by pounding it really tight, I'm getting rid of those air bubbles, and I'm also going to be releasing more of that brine that we saw collecting in the bottom of the mixing bowl. That's probably good for now. It's getting nice and juicy, and then I'm just gonna keep adding right on top of that and doing the pounding every few scoops. And so you can really fit a lot more cabbage into a jar like this than you would maybe necessarily expect. Okay, so I made 4 jars of kraut, 2 pint jars, and 2 little jam jars. That's how much that cabbage fit. It really packs down a lot more than you might expect. And you can see there's a lot of liquid on the top there, which is exactly what you want. And you want all of your cabbage to be underneath that liquid. And so a lot of times you can really just press it down and pack it down tight, but sometimes it'll float back up. The solution for this is to use the core of the cabbage or some of the stalk, the back end that you cut off, and you can push this down onto the top and kind of tuck it under the shoulder of the jar, and it will hold all of the kraut underneath the liquid. If the cabbage, the kraut comes above the liquid, that is when things like mold can occur. Now I'm going to put my lid on my jar, and I'm going to use a plastic lid because the salt water, that's the brine, will cause the metal lids of mason jars to rust. So I always use a plastic lid. If you don't have a plastic lid, you could put a piece of wax paper between you, or plastic wrap between your metal lid and your jar. And so I'm going to cap this, and I'm going to cap it like, I'm going to do it all the way tight and then just a little bit less, tiny bit less. You can also use an airlock if you have that. Now this is ready to store on my counter for 3 to 5 days, and I'm going to put it on a plate. You could also put it in a bowl, but this is going to catch any liquid that bubbles up out of the jar because there's a lot of activity going on in there, so sometimes it can spurt out or burp out. And so likewise, you can kind of loosen up your jar lid every couple days to allow some of that carbon dioxide to escape, to avoid it overflowing. And that's the process. So you can continue to check on this every few days and just taste the cabbage, taste the kraut, and once it reaches like your desired fermentation, because it can get tangier over time or it can be a little lighter at the beginning, then you can move it to the refrigerator, and that will slow or stop the fermentation process, so it'll stay right at that level where you kind of paused it. And then you can store it in the fridge. You can serve this on top of just about anything: sandwiches, rice dishes, curries. You can eat it straight out of the jar. And now you have all of the benefits of the probiotics that are contained in fermented foods, as well as the nutrition that was in the cabbage in the first place. You have vitamin C, vitamin K, folate, so much goodness packed very tightly in this jar. Like I said earlier, you can also check out Fermenti. Their link to their website is in the description of this video for more fermented products and education. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I can't wait to see what kind of kraut you create.